Hey there, welcome back to my channel. So today in this video tutorial, we are going to implement Drizzle ORM in our order service. In the catalog service, we have implemented the Prisma ORM and we have seen how we can easily interact with the database without writing some kind of the SQL queries, right? The similar way we are going to implement here also in the order service. In the Drizzle ORM, it is giving a little bit SQL flavor where you can reutilize your SQL knowledge, right? You can see the syntax is pretty much similar, just like DB select what you are going to select from which table or something like that, right? So it is going to be a lot of fun to integrate the Drizzle ORM, right? And a lot of companies, they're just switching back from the other ORM to Drizzle, right? Because of its flexibility and easy to use, and it has the wide range of like the supports, right? In our case, we are going to implement Node Postgres. If you go to Drizzle websites and go to the documentation section and click on the PostgreSQL. So let's go ahead and integrate Drizzle to our microservice. And we are going to implement all these things, and we will be configure our database client also with the help of some kind of client connection, or maybe we can use the pull connection as well, right? So let's go to the source code here. Right here in the source code, you can see we have our catalog service and order service, right? And we have created another directory that is called database, right? DB. And inside the DB, we are keeping one Docker Compose file, which is helping us to spin our database, right? So this is the database server, which is we are spinning for our catalog service, right? For order service, we need to use another database server. So this is not a kind of good practice to keep only one single database per body microservice, right? So definitely we need to keep a separate database server for our order service, right? So let's try to do that first, right? So what we are going to do, we are going to rename this database Postgres to our just like catalog Postgres. Right? Catalog Postgres. And, or maybe we can say like catalog DB, let's say. Catalog DB. This is going to be catalog DB server. Right? Then we can just copy these things right here and we can edit one more services. This is going to be like this. And this time it will be our order DB server, right? And you can see we are sharing the common port number, right? So this is going to be 32, then this is going to be 33. I'm not sure whether I have a conflict or with this port or not. Maybe once we are running the server, then we will get to know, like, because in my machine, I'm running tons of like, maybe more than 10 different PostgreSQL server. So hope for the best, right? So anyway, so this is perfectly fine. Then definitely this is not going to be a catalog DB. Let's try to change all this catalog stuff from here to our order. All right, so order DB password, order DB service. And this is also, we can keep it like, instead of this part, what we can do, let's try to make like this way, like this, right? And here also we can keep like this order DB server, right? Perfect. So then inside this DB data, we will be having, instead of this Postgres, let's try to drop this one, right? Then we'll be having another two set of the directory, one for the catalog DB server and one for our the order DB server. So let's try to spin this database server first, right before integrating this Drizzle ORM, right? So let's try to spin this database services first, right? So here I'm going to open this DB right here in my terminal. You can see I'm opening the workspace. That's why it is just switching back to this DB automatically. And here we can say Docker Compose up, right? First of all, let's try to spin the Docker Compose up in the foreground, so at least we can see if there are any kind of the errors or something. At least we can debug it, right? So let's try to do that, right? All right, perfect. So since everything is going well here, apart from the logs, right? So let's go to the Docker desktop. So I have already installed my Docker desktop in my machine. So here you can see in the Docker desktop, this is our DB, right? Inside this DB, we have the order DB and catalog DB, and both of the database servers are running in the certain port numbers, 5432 and 5433. All right. At this point, our database servers are ready, right? So let's go to the source code again, right? So I'm going to stop this database server from the foreground, and I'm going to run in the background, right? That is called Docker Compose up -d, right? In detached mode. So right now it is running in the background, all right? Still you can see it is working correctly. So here inside this order service, we need to install a couple of packages, right? So first of all, as the documentation said here, first of all, we need to install our Drizzle ORM PG, right? And after that, we need to install this one, like the Drizzle kit and types PG, right? So let's try to install one by one. Right now I'm inside this order service and try to install this one. Perfect. So now let's go ahead and install the development dependencies, right? So let's try to grab this line here and let's try to add it here once again. So now we have added all the required library and dependencies, right? So let's go ahead and configure our Drizzle ORM. So first of all, here inside this src directory, right? There's a kind of directory that is called config. So here inside this config, we will keep all the required credentials in terms of our env variables or our database URL or application port, etc. We can keep it inside, right? So at any point of time while we are going to deploy our this microservice, at the time this configuration will be responsible to grab the essential all the secrets from our environment and expose to our application, right? So let's try to do that. Here inside config, let's try to create one file. This is going to be our index.ts, right? So here inside the config, let's try to import .env. .env will be config, right? So this is going to help us to load our environment file, .env file, this file, right? So here already we have the app port. Maybe we can add one more thing. This is going to be like our database. Right? So this is going to similar just like our catalog service maybe. Let's see we have if any. Yeah, this is the same thing, right? Let's try to grab these things from here, right? Copy and let's go here in .env and edit right there. Right, so these credentials are coming from here. If you go to docker compose.yaml file, let's try to close this one. You can see this is db order, db password, or order db password, or order service. Those are the things we need to utilize. So let's try to add all those things here, right? So make sure this is the right file. And here, this is going to be our order db. And this is going to be order db password. And this is going to be our order service, right? Perfect. So rest of all will be same. Only things going to be changed, just like our port number, right? 5438, because this is the same port number we are going to use right here, right? This is the port number. Cool. So our database URL is ready, or maybe you can just remove this double quotation also from here. This is also gonna work, and we can go here. Then our .env file, while we are going to load this config file, then it will assign our .env file to a kind of constraint. So let's try to use that one. So these are the variables it has to believe right here, right? So maybe we can say like this, come over here, right? Perfect. So we have our database URL and we have our app port that is going to come from our config, so we can utilize in our application. So our configuration is pretty much ready to use, right? So let's try to configure the Drizzle ORM, right? So here inside this the order service in the root directory, not inside this source directory, right? So here we are going to create one file. This is called drizzleconfig.ts, right? Where this drizzleconfig.ts file is coming from? Let's go to the website here, right? So if you go to Drizzle kit right here, and if you scroll down a little bit in the configuration section, right? So they're suggesting like there are 3 types of file we need to create in order to use the Drizzle, right? So this is the file exactly it needed. So Drizzle can recognize like these are the configurations I need to use. As an example, schema, we can keep some directory structure, and that directory structure we need to point it out like this is the specific path we will be used for the schema, and same for the drivers, same for the credentials, and how we can utilize is like verbose or strict mode, everything we can just mention right here, right? And you can see all the configuration properties from this URL, right? So the similar pattern we are going to follow, right? So let's try to grab this piece of code from here rather than waste time on the typing, and let's go to the source code here and let's try to add it here. Cool. So it's showing some error. That's not a problem. We can resolve it, right? So in this case, what we are going to do, let's try to import the database URL. This is called DB URL. And it seems like still it is giving some kind of error. So we can just cast it as a string, right? Then error has gone. And in this case, the schema, we can put the structure in terms of where the schema going to be live. Like while we're creating our tables, at that time we need to point that specific directory where we'll be writing our tables code, right? So inside here in the source, and you can see we have created one directory that is called DB and then the schema. So this particular directory, we need to point it out, right? So let's try to do that. So here, right after this, the root directory access, right? Like /, we will say src/db, and we will say schema, right? And after that, all the files, whatever the files inside the schema, we can put it like this. And you can give a little bit more pattern stuff like .entity.ts or something like that. But we are not going to consider everything. Whatever we are going to keep the file, all the schema file we are going to keep store inside the schema directory. So that's why we're saying like all the files please consider as a kind of schema, right? Then one more directory we are going to mention, because while we are going to run the migrations, then somewhere the migration file has to be stored, right? So at least we can keep track of all the migrations, right? So let's try to do that. So in this case, we will say out directory, and this is the similar pattern we are going to follow. Let's try to grab this piece of code from here and add it right here. Perfect. So now instead of this schema, we will say migrations, right? And let's try to remove this the trail stuff, right? This piece of code is not required right after the migrations. And driver is the PostgreSQL, right? This is perfectly fine. And maybe if you are comfortable with another driver or something else, then you need to utilize accordingly. So in this case, you can follow the documentation and follow the configuration settings for that, right? And here we are pretty much done, right? Now what we are going to do, let's go ahead here inside the schema directory. And here inside the schema directory, let's try to create one file. This is going to be like index.ts, right? And one more file we are going to create. This is going to be like card.ts, right? So here in this index.ts, because we are going to refer this schema directory, right? So let's try to import this card.ts. This is not essentially need to do, like you need to refer to the card, or maybe something like this way, export start from card. And anyway, while we are going to run the configuration, it is going to be pointed out the schema and all the TS file. It'll consider as a kind of schema. But while it comes to the utilization of our models or all the entities, all tables, all right, then this index.ts file will be going to be very, very helpful. So you no need to point out like which file exactly inside this schema directory. So that's why we have just created this index.ts file, right? So let's try to add some code right here quickly in the card.ts file. Then I'm going to explain what we need to do right here and how the thing's going to work accordingly, right? Perfect. So now we have created our cards table, right? So it is giving some kind of error because while we are very much relying on the auto import, then this kind of things are happening. So let's try to do one thing. So what we are going to do, this integer exactly, it has to be from the PZ core, because we are not going to use the SQLite core. And the same thing like from our MySQL also. Let's try to remove these things from here and add it from here. Right? So now can you see like all the errors has gone, right? So make sure while you are using the Postgres, all the types like serial, integer, timestamp, or whatever the things gonna use, like everything has to be imported from our PZ core, right? Perfect. So now we can see we have our card table, right? So we have our ID. This is going to be our serial number, and this is going to be a kind of primary key for our database. And this is our customer ID, and you can see we are setting up especially the not null, and it has to be unique, right? and created an app and updated app. This is a kind of like timestamp. Definitely it's going to be needed for each and every table, right? So finally we are exporting the type right here. This is called card, and we are infer select model from the cards. So this particular function is helping us to convert the card, the entity card table to our card type, right? So this is the way, end of the day, we are seeing like the ID is a number, or customer ID, created at, updated at, whatever it is, right? Perfect. So now this is pretty much ready to use, right? And what we need to do, we need to somehow create this table in our database, right? So how we can do that? So in this case, we need to add some kind of configuration, just like we have added for our Drizzle config.ts. And the similar way, we are going to create one more file to run the migrations, right? So let's try to create one file. This is going to be our migration.ts, right? And here we will be adding some kind of code quickly, and I will explain how or why we need to add this specific particular things to run the migration, right? So let me add the code, and I'm gonna make you understand how the things gonna be work. So now we have created one function that is called run migration, right? So while we are going to call this particular script, right? So this is going to establish a connection that is called connection pool, all right? Using our database URL. And once that the pool has been created, right? Using this Drizzle method from our Node Postgres, and then this migrate function, this is going to execute. This is imported again from the Node Postgres and migrator, right? And we are providing this migration directory from here, right? Then once all the migrations are going to be executed successfully, then we are going to have a kind of successful console log right here. And if anything is going to be wrong right there, then we can say like migration error right here, right? So now let's try to execute all this stuff right there. But right before that, let's go to the package.json file here, and let's try to add a couple of scripts here, right? Perfect. So let's try to add some scripts right here. Perfect. So we have added a couple of scripts, right? db generate, push, migrate, and studio, right? So let's try to have a look what exactly all these commands are going to do, right? So first of all, db generate. This db generate command is going to generate all the schema, whatever the schema we have just created here, as an example, the card, right? So while we're going to run this particular command, at the time it will generate the migrations file from this card to the migrations directory, right? And as you can see, we are using PostgreSQL. That's why we are saying like generate PG. Or if you are using some different database driver, right, then use that accordingly. As an example, generate MySQL or SQLite or whatever it is, right? And the similar way, the db push is going to do the same thing, but this is what exactly it's doing. It is rather than like generating all the migrations file without the omitting the migrations file, it is directly applying all these changes to the database, right? So this db push exactly, it's going to be helpful while you are working on the development purpose only, not for like in the production environment, right? Some changes, let's say minor tweaking you are going to do, then you no need to make these changes on the migrations files. Directly you can run the Drizzle kit push pg, then all these changes going to reflect in your development database, right? And db migration, this is pretty explanatory. So while we are going to run the db migrate, then it is going to run all the migrations, whatever the migrations files is going to be created inside this migrations directory. This is going to apply in our database, right? And db studio, this is simply just like for visualization purpose only. while you are going to run this DB Studio command, then one kind of the web application or maybe DB Studio application is going to run right there in the port 6000. So you can visualize like what were the data you have inserted or some table changes, everything you can see right here, right? So let's try to run a couple of commands in order to continue our tutorial. Right, so now we need to run all these commands, right? But right before that, we need to make sure like all the dependencies are on place, right? So Drizzle kit, this is already we have installed, right? You can see in the dev dependency, we have installed this one. And one thing we need to install right here, this is called TSX, because while you are going to run the migration, it is going to be failed because this TSX library, it is not yet still existing in our order or microservice, right? So let's try to install that one. Yarn add TSX as dev dependency, right? Cool. So now it is added. If you go to package.json file, if you have a look at the dev dependency, you can see this is installed, right? All right. So let's try to execute all this stuff from here, right? Perfect. So now let's try to run all these commands, right? First of all, let's try to run the yarn db generate, right? Perfect. So now can you see it is executed successfully, and you can see inside this migrations directory, we have one SQL file has been created right here. And you can see this is the file, it's called cards, right? And we can clearly see this is a kind of SQL file where we're simply creating the cards table, right? If it doesn't exist, then it is going to be created one for us, right? And all those things, it is coming from the card schema, right? All the attributes we have declared here, and this is fairly coming right here, right? Perfect. Then let's go ahead here in the package.json file. Let's try to migrate all these changes, right? Whatever the things are created here, let's try to migrate here and yarn db migrate, right? So our migration was successful, right? So at this moment, we should supposed to see some kind of data in the database table, right? So let's go here in the database client. So in my case, right now I'm using data grip, right? So here in the data grip, I'm going to open a connection here. This one here, new and this process, right? And here. So here, the process, and user was right as the and you can see the user is already, right? Already and already user, and there's already users mostly, right? Yeah, already users. This is users, right? Now let's try the session. Yeah, successful. Now apply and click OK. So now it should have to be give us like all the tables, right? So this is our order service localhost. If you go to order service right here and see here, we have one table. This is called card. Can you see? We have our ID, we have our customer ID created and updated at. That's really cool, right? So each and every time while we are going to make some changes, then we no need to migrate repeatedly, or maybe we can just simply run this command. This is called like db push, or in the similar way, like yarn run or yarn db push. Right? So at this moment, we don't have any changes, so you can see no changes are detected. So here, inside here in the DB directory, right? Let's close it up, the schema directory, as well as in the root directory. What we can do in the DB root directory, we'll be going to create one file. This is going to be our connection, right? All right. So let's try to create the file. It's called connection.ts, right? So, or maybe we can make it more precise. DB connection, let's say db.connection.ts. So here I'm gonna write some code quickly, then I'll make you understand what exactly we are going to do here. Perfect. So now we have just created one connection, right? It's called DB connection, right? Or maybe you can directly say something else also, but we're trying to keep a little bit meaningful way because it's a kind of constant. That's why we're keeping capital letter DB, all right? And you can see we have imported all the schema, all right? All the files from the schema as a schema, and this is our DB URL. And we have just created one pull connection also here from the connection string, the similar connection string we are using from our configuration file, right? From the config directory. And finally, we are creating one DB constant, right? And this DB constant is a kind of the Node PG database, right? And here we are passing the type of the schema, and finally we are assigning the pull and the schema right here in this DB constant, right? So then when we are having some kind of operation, then we can simply access all the schema, available schema from this DB itself, right? So this is perfectly fine, right? So now let's try it out in one of our handler or maybe endpoint, just to check like whether we are able to create some data or not, right? So let's go here in the routes, right? Go to the cart routes. And this is the route, the post route, where we are just creating our cart, right? So here inside the service, create cart, let's go to here. And inside this create service, so inside this create cart, inside this cart service, right? So here we are creating the cart by passing all this data to the repository, right? So let's go to this repository here in the create function. So inside this repository, go to the cart repository. And can you see we have the line number 6, we just kept a kind of comment. It's called connect to the DB, right? So let's try to connect to the DB here, right? So what we are going to do, we're going to say like const result will be await. Then we will say DB. So that DB we need to import, right? Which is already we have created from the connection. And now DB dot insert. And what we are going to insert, so here we need to provide the schema name, right? You can see like table is a kind of PG table. That table will come from our here, from the schema. If you go here, inside DB, inside the schema, this one exactly we need to use, right? And you can see already we have imported this one. So let's go ahead here and put here cards, right? And right after that, what we are going to do, we need to assign the values, right? So DB insert the cards and we will say values. And inside this value, what we need to pass it here, simply we will say customer ID. Customer ID. This is, let's say, I'm going to pass some kind of hard-coded value because we have not evaluated this input, what kind of input it will be, right? So let's try to provide, let's say 1, 2, 3, right? Then we are not required anything else from here, right? So what exactly it's going to be here? Let's go to the schema. And we can see only the customer ID is needed, right? The ID will be automatically going to generate, and created and updated at also will going to be generated. So while we are going to call this endpoint, then definitely a record is going to be created by 1 to 3, right? So later on we are going to place this one with the dynamic data, right? So let's try to print it out also, console log, or here we can say result. But somehow once we are created this data, we need to return something, right? So what we can do, we can say returning, then we will say cart ID will be cards.id, right? So this is going to help us to keep track of like what kind of card or which record has been created, right? So let's try to return accordingly. And now let's go ahead here and spin the application, right? So yarn dev. Perfect. So it is listening to port 9000, right? So if we go to our http request.http, and here we can send a request, right? So can you see like it is giving the response, right? And it says like card ID is 1. And if you go to our database client in the data grid, if we refresh the data, we should supposed to see, can you see? Yeah, this is the ID and this is our customer ID, and this is created and updated, right? Perfect. So this is the way we can interact with our database using the Drizzle ORM. So this is very basic example exactly. We need to deep dive a little bit more complex example in terms of like we are going to have a lot of relations and etc. While we're creating the card, we need to create the card item as well as, right? So these are the things. It's going to be a little bit extendable work. So where we are going to cover all the use cases. In the next episode onward, we are going to put purely our hands on the creating card and orders. Then we're going to integrate our Kafka and Elasticsearch accordingly, right? Perfect. Then I hope you have enjoyed this video tutorial, and I will see you in another episode. Bye-bye.